I'm interested in how you balance out that narrative that there is weakness, particularly in Europe, when you're coming to desire to get into industrial chips. There is worry about China, but AI is still the bright spot.
That's right, Caroline. So we see AI as a pretty big opportunity, and it's not just on the GPU side for AMD, it's across the board, data center spending. So we believe they're going to benefit from this new chip, the Milano, but also from their CPUs as well, like the Bergamo and Genoa. And that was really the big surprise this quarter. Investors had expected that AMD's guidance was very aggressive for the second half of this year, but they were able to deliver and guide to still 50% growth for the data center segment overall.
They're thinking, what, about a $2 billion run rate by the end of it? I'm interested as to whether you think these two players, NVIDIA and AMD, are going to be the ones that take all, whether the market is going to be so vast, the TAM of 150 billion or so, that we can still see entrants taking market share.
So we do see new entrants coming in. However, AMD and NVIDIA have the early start, so they're going to be able to capture a significant part of the market share. We're going to see some of the cloud vendors develop their own solutions as well, so we see them benefiting from this trend. Amazon has some new products that they're introducing, but NVIDIA and AMD will be able to capture a big part of market share as their first movers in this market.
Ivana, AMD shares are up 8%, as I said, on track for the biggest jump since May. And a lot of the sell side are talking about the MI300 being the catalyst for the stock, right? Your ETF includes both AMD and NVIDIA. The MI300 is a direct competitor to the H100, which is already out there in the real world in volume. So how do you play this? How do you consider the composition of the ETF going forward?
So we see data center as a $1 trillion market that is going to need upgrading, right? So we see opportunities for multiple players. The shares of NVIDIA have stalled out recently due to China concerns and also people just being cautious on the AI being hype versus reality. But we do believe that we are going to see significant investments, and we do think that these companies are going to be able to compound at over 50% CAGR over the next few years.
The story of NVIDIA over the course of 2023 is a stock up almost 190%. Do you expect AMD's stock to track like the NVIDIA story did with the H100 if they can prove that they can scale up MI300 in the same way that NVIDIA did?
Well, NVIDIA really got oversold at some point in the cycle. So a lot of what you're seeing here in terms of the move is from really depressed levels. So we do see similar upside from here for both NVIDIA and AMD.
I mean, what's really interesting is, of course, you set up and launched SPRX in large part to find the undervalued areas of particularly B2B industrial use of tech. Talk to us from a macro perspective, geographically, where you are worried about, because there was serious signs of some European slowdown. Is that going to be long-lasting? Do we think that that can be offset by this just insatiable demand for artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, Caroline, interestingly, technology is going to be one of the least sensitive to the economy sectors. So while you're going to see some movement, like, for example, in consumer technology, we see some downside in autos. We're seeing a lot of negative data points on the EV side. We saw similar impact on semiconductor companies that sell to autos. So we believe that consumer is going to be where the downside is going to be in the near term here, driven by the economy and really high interest rates. So those areas of the economy are going to be more sensitive, and that's what we are avoiding. However, enterprise just went through a down cycle in spending. Companies already cut their budgets to a pretty low level. So we see those comps being pretty favorably positioned going into 2024. So areas like cloud, data infrastructure, cybersecurity, we think those are going to be good areas to be into in next year.
Ivana, I always wanted to ask you how much you nerd out, how deep you go on the details on a product like this, right? We're going to look at some pictures of the MI300. You know, a lot of the work in the market this morning is based on what Lisa Su had to say. Do you go through the specs of these semiconductors and go with your own conviction call based on deep research, or do you just go based on the commentary of executives?
So we do very fundamental, deep research, and where we differentiate ourselves is that we read data across the value chain. So we're going to be talking to companies like Microsoft that are going to be partnering with companies like NVIDIA. We're talking to smaller cap companies that sell liquid cooling to the data center segment, that are selling casings to the data center segment. So we gather these data points from multiple sources, and that gives us confidence in where the data center spending cycle is going. So it really is not about just following what management is saying. It's really trying to understand how they're positioned in the ecosystem by getting data points from the supply chain.
You've been doing that sort of deep research at Deutsche, at Citadel, at Millennium. Global companies with global perspectives. Give us the global take on how much AMD is going to be exposed to China and the rift that continues when it comes to the tit-to-tat in technology.
Well, China is going to be a big risk to both AMD and NVIDIA. And we're going to see how the geopolitics, we don't necessarily make geopolitical calls, so we're going to see how that evolves over the next few years. But it's a pretty large market, and both the AMD and NVIDIA are very well positioned there because they're really the only game in town. And the consumer side in China of enterprise companies is pretty large, and they're pretty big consumers of this product. So if they're shut down from this market, we do see the upside going maybe 5 years out being really capped, and we see earnings stalling out then. But for the next 3 years, we do see strong demand just from US domestic hyperscalers and enterprises. We've not really seen enterprises participate in this cycle yet. So we do see pretty significant near-term upside in the next 2 to 3 years.